Picture Hollywood in December 1942. America had been at war for exactly 1 year since Pearl Harbor shocked the nation into global conflict. While young men died on Pacific islands and in North African deserts, while German U-boats sank Allied ships in the Atlantic with terrifying efficiency, one of Hollywood's most beautiful actresses was trying desperately to contribute something more meaningful than selling war bonds with her famous face. This was an era when women's war contributions were carefully channeled into acceptable roles: nursing, factory work, keeping the home front running, but never into the realm of military innovation and scientific advancement. Tonight, we explore how Hedy Lamarr's revolutionary torpedo guidance invention was dismissed by the US Navy with 5 devastating words that would haunt her for 50 years. It's a story about genius rejected because of beauty, about patriotism crushed by prejudice, and about the particular heartbreak of being told your mind doesn't matter when you've offered your country your best idea to save lives. By December 1942, Hedy Lamarr had been a Hollywood sensation for 4 years since her dramatic arrival from war-torn Europe. Louis B. Mayer had brought her to MGM in 1938, renamed her from Hedwig Kiesler to the more glamorous Hedy Lamarr, and positioned her carefully as the most beautiful woman in the world. She had starred in successful films opposite Clark Gable, Spencer Tracy, and James Stewart. Her face sold magazines by the thousands. Her appearance at war bond rallies drew massive crowds that blocked city streets, and her mere presence could make strong men forget their own names. The studio system had transformed the Austrian refugee into American royalty, the kind of star whose beauty seemed almost supernatural in its perfection. But Hedy carried a secret that made her profoundly different from every other actress in Hollywood's glamorous constellation of stars. Those dinner parties in Austria at Fritz Mandel's villa, where she had sat trapped and objectified while Nazi officers and arms dealers discussed weapons technology in meticulous detail, had planted seeds that were now bearing extraordinary fruit. She understood radio frequencies in ways that exceeded most engineers. She grasped torpedo guidance systems with mathematical precision, and she clearly recognized the critical vulnerability that was costing Allied lives every single day. Enemy forces could jam the radio signals controlling torpedoes, rendering them useless spinning pieces of metal. German U-boats were destroying supply convoys with devastating effectiveness, and Hedy knew exactly why the existing torpedo technology was failing so catastrophically. In her Beverly Hills mansion, amid the elegant furniture and Hollywood glamour that represented her public life to the world, Hedy had created something extraordinary that nobody in the film industry knew existed. A makeshift laboratory where she worked on solving a problem that Navy engineers with advanced degrees and government funding couldn't crack. The contrast was stark and entirely deliberate. One room would be filled with movie scripts from MGM, costume sketches for upcoming films, and glamorous photographs from her latest premieres. The very next room held radio equipment, technical manuals borrowed from university libraries, mathematical calculations covering dozens of pages, and prototype designs sketched with engineering precision. She would finish a day of filming looking impossibly beautiful on camera, playing yet another role as the gorgeous love interest, then come home exhausted to work late into the night on frequency calculations and synchronization problems, her famous face free of makeup, her brilliant mind finally allowed to function at full capacity without pretense or performance. Her neighbor and unlikely collaborator was George Antheil, an avant-garde composer famous throughout artistic circles for his experimental ballet mécanique that had scandalized New York audiences in 1927 by incorporating airplane propellers, electric bells, and industrial sounds into classical music composition. Antheil understood synchronized mechanical systems, complex rhythm, and precise timing in ways that translated surprisingly well to engineering challenges. When Hedy explained her core idea over dinner one evening in early 1941, using multiple radio frequencies that would hop in synchronized patterns between transmitter and receiver, making signals essentially impossible to jam or intercept. Antheil immediately grasped the revolutionary implications. His eyes had widened with recognition and excitement. "Like a player piano," he had said, almost shouting. "The perforated roll tells it which keys to play and exactly when. If only the piano knows the song, nobody else can predict the melody or jam the music." They worked together intensively for months through late 1941 and into 1942, developing what they formally called a secret communication system in their patent application. The concept was mathematically elegant and brilliantly practical. Instead of using a single radio frequency to guide torpedoes toward their targets, which enemies could easily detect and jam by broadcasting interference on that same frequency, their system would rapidly switch between 88 different frequencies, the same number as piano keys, in a specific pattern known only to the transmitter and receiver. Like a piano with 88 keys, playing a complex melody that only the torpedo could hear and follow, the frequency hopping would make the guidance signal virtually impossible to intercept or block. The synchronized switching would happen so quickly, several times per second, that enemies couldn't track the pattern, even if they detected individual frequency bursts. But the torpedo would follow perfectly, reaching its target, even in the chaos of naval warfare, with jamming attempts happening all around it. Antheil contributed the mechanical synchronization mechanism inspired by player piano technology he knew intimately from his musical experiments. The same automated systems that made pianos play themselves by reading perforated paper rolls could coordinate the frequency changes with absolute precision and perfect timing. Hedy provided the core frequency hopping concept, the mathematical framework of how many frequencies would be needed for genuine security, and the precise calculations of how quickly they should switch for optimal effectiveness in actual combat conditions. Together, they created something that didn't exist anywhere else in the world, something that could genuinely change naval warfare and save countless American lives being lost to U-boat attacks in the freezing Atlantic waters. The personal stakes for Hedy were profound and deeply emotional in ways that transcended normal patriotism or civic duty. Her adopted country, America, was fighting against Nazi Germany, the regime she had personally fled in terror, the ideology that had made her Jewish heritage a death sentence, the systematic evil that was murdering people like her family members who hadn't managed to escape Austria in time before the borders closed. Every news report of Allied ships sunk, every casualty list from submarine attacks, every story of young sailors dying in burning oil slicks felt intensely personal to her. She had the ability to help, the knowledge to contribute something meaningful, and the desperate need to prove that she was more than just a beautiful face on screen. This wasn't about fame or recognition, or even being remembered by history. This was about using her mind to fight the Nazis in the most meaningful way possible, about turning the knowledge she had been forced to absorb during those terrible years with Fritz Mandl into something that would save lives instead of taking them. In June 1942, Hedy and George received U.S. patent number 292-387 for their secret communication system. The patent application was technically sophisticated, demonstrating genuine engineering insight and innovation at a level that impressed even skeptical patent examiners who reviewed hundreds of military technology proposals. They didn't seek profit or commercial advantage. Hedy made absolutely clear from the very beginning that she wanted to donate the patent freely to the U.S. government for the war effort. She wanted nothing in return, no money, no public recognition, except the profound satisfaction of knowing her invention would save American sailors' lives and help defeat the fascism she had personally escaped. The patent represented everything she had learned from those terrible years trapped in Mandl's villa, all that absorbed knowledge about weapons systems and radio technology, now channeled purposefully toward protecting rather than destroying lives. The National Inventors Council, a government organization established specifically to evaluate civilian contributions to military technology, reviewed their patent submission carefully, and recognized its genuine potential for changing naval warfare. They passed it along to the U.S. Navy with strong recommendations for serious consideration and rapid implementation given the urgent wartime need. This was the moment Hedy had been working toward for months, respected evaluation by the military professionals who could actually implement her invention, who could put it into production and start saving lives immediately. She allowed herself to hope, perhaps even to imagine a future where people knew her not just as a beautiful actress, but as someone whose mind had contributed meaningfully to winning the war and defeating evil. The Navy's response arrived in December 1942, 6 months after the patent was granted. Admiral Stanford C. Hooper, director of the technical division at the Bureau of Ships, was assigned to personally evaluate the frequency-hopping torpedo guidance system. Hooper was old guard Navy through and through, a career officer who had spent decades in military service, who trusted established procedures and regarded civilian innovations, especially from unexpected sources, with deep institutional skepticism. He looked at the patent submitted by a Hollywood actress, famous primarily for being beautiful, and an avant-garde composer, known for experimental music that most people found incomprehensible, and he made a decision that would devastate Hedy Lamarr and postpone the development of spread-spectrum technology for decades. The meeting where Hedy received the Navy's official verdict took place in a sterile government office in Washington, D.C., where she had traveled specifically at her own considerable expense to discuss implementation of her invention. She had prepared extensively for weeks, reviewing all the technical specifications, rehearsing detailed explanations of how the frequency hopping would work in actual combat conditions, anticipating every possible question or technical objection. She wore an elegant but deliberately professional suit rather than glamorous Hollywood attire, trying to look serious and capable rather than beautiful, desperately wanting to be taken seriously as an inventor, rather than treated as a movie star, making a publicity gesture or dabbling in technical matters beyond her understanding. Admiral Hooper barely looked at her carefully prepared technical explanations and diagrams when she tried to present them. According to detailed accounts Hedy would later share with close friends and interviewers over the decades, recounting the meeting with pain that never diminished even 50 years later, he dismissed the entire frequency-hopping concept as too complicated to be practical for military implementation in the field. The torpedo guidance system, he explained with the kind of patronizing patience that men of his generation reserved for women they considered intellectually inferior, needed to be simple and reliable above all other considerations. The idea of switching rapidly between 88 different frequencies seemed unnecessarily complex and potentially unreliable to military minds accustomed to straightforward mechanical solutions. Never mind that the existing simple solutions were failing catastrophically in actual combat, that German forces were jamming Allied torpedo signals with ease, that American submarines were firing torpedoes that enemy vessels could easily evade or disable because they could detect and block the single-frequency guidance signals. Then came the 5 words that broke something fundamental inside Hedy Lamarr, words she would remember with painful crystal clarity 50 years later when interviewers asked about her inventing career. "You'd do more for your country if you used your star status to sell war bonds rather than your talent for invention," the Admiral suggested, with what he apparently considered kindness and helpful career advice for a confused actress, that Hedy should stick to acting, to being beautiful on screen, to using her fame and her face to raise money for the war effort through public appearances and bond rallies where her beauty would draw crowds and open wallets. Her mind, her innovation, her months of intensive work, her attempt to contribute something genuinely meaningful beyond her appearance, all of it dismissed because she was a woman, because she was an actress, because beautiful women in 1942 America weren't supposed to be capable of serious scientific thought or military innovation. The rejection was absolute and crushing in its totality. The Navy classified her patent for security reasons, but explicitly declined to develop or implement it in any practical way. The frequency hopping system that could have saved lives, that represented months of intensive collaborative work and genuine innovation that didn't exist anywhere else in the world, was simply filed away in government archives and forgotten by military bureaucracy. Hedy was sent back to Hollywood with the painfully clear message that her proper role was to look pretty, smile for cameras, and leave the actual thinking to men, even when those men demonstrably couldn't solve the problems she had already cracked with mathematical precision. Hedy returned to her Beverly Hills home devastated in ways that her Hollywood friends struggled to comprehend or comfort. To the outside world, nothing visible had changed. She was still the glamorous movie star, still appearing in successful films, still beautiful beyond ordinary belief. But something fundamental had broken inside her that would never fully heal. She had offered her country her best idea, the product of her brilliant mathematical mind, knowledge gained through years of forced attendance at weapons discussions in Austria, genuine innovation that represented her deepest intelligence and capability. And she had been told it was worthless, not because the technology didn't work or wasn't needed, but simply because of who she was, or rather, what she looked like. George Antheil was angry and frustrated by the military bureaucracy's short-sightedness and prejudice, but as a man and a composer, he could eventually move on to other musical projects and compositions, without the rejection fundamentally defining his worth as a human being. For Hedy, the rejection cut infinitely deeper, because it confirmed her worst fears about how the world saw her, fears that had haunted her since her days trapped with Fritz Mandel, watching men value her only for her appearance. No matter what she did, no matter how hard she worked, or how brilliant her ideas proved to be, people would only ever see the beautiful face. Her intelligence was invisible, her contributions were unwelcome, her mind didn't matter in any context that counted. She was decoration, not substance, entertainment, not innovation. An object to be admired from a distance, not a person with valuable ideas to be taken seriously. For Hedy, the broken heart from that rejection never truly healed, because it confirmed something she had feared since escaping Austria, that her mind would always be invisible to a world that only valued her face, that her beauty was actually a curse preventing anyone from seeing her intelligence, that she was doomed forever to be valued only for the genetic accident of her facial structure, rather than the earned brilliance of her scientific thinking. The Navy's rejection wasn't just professional disappointment. It was existential invalidation of her deepest self, the part of her that mattered most. The intelligence she had cultivated and offered as a patriotic gift, only to have it contemptuously thrown back in her face with 5 words that would echo in her mind until she died.